Okay, well, this is another one of those videos where I have no idea who will be interested in it. But this came about as a result of something I discovered, and I mentioned in a previous video where I talked about the stupid mistakes I was making when measuring resistors using my auto-ranging meter. To be honest, it really bothered me that I was making such dumb mistakes. And as I pondered this, I really wanted to kind of understand why I was doing that. Of course, once you understand something, then hopefully you can avoid it in the future. And it finally came to me, at least part of the problem has to do with my history of using meters. And you see on my bench this little meter. This is the very first meter I ever owned, and I still have it. As you can see from the electrical tape on it, oops, it's on the crack. This thing has been dropped and bounced way too many times. You can hear stuff loose in it. The meter movement in this is damaged. I think right now it's probably got a tired battery, because I probably should just take the battery out because I don't use this anymore, obviously. The meter movement doesn't like the zero anymore, and so this meter, oh, and thankfully they got rid of this design. The cables have these little pins, and if you were to take this apart, on the back side of these connectors, they're little, there's a little split piece in the back that you can clamp down to get it to make a good connection on this. It's been done many times with this meter to try to keep these to stay in, and none of these are, oops, none of these stay in well. I started learning about electronics back when I was age 12, and I watched my dad working on stuff. I think I got this meter somewhere around age 14 or 15, maybe. So that was, well, if it was 15, that would have been in 1968. This meter is very old. It does still work. If I were to put these cables back in and short it out, it would actually respond. But I know I've got to take the battery out of it because it's going to just leak inside there and do bad things. So, but anyway, so 68 was when I first started using a meter, and of course back then analog was pretty much all you had, I think. Although transistorized stuff was coming into existence back then. So, but in any case, this is what I started out with. After that one got bounced too many times, this got used on everything. When I was working on my car, I was working on house electrical stuff, you name it. This poor little meter would get perched someplace precarious, and I'd forget and pull one of the cables, and it would go sailing and wind up on the ground. And well, the results are pretty clear. It's kind of tired. Well, this is just a short addendum. I took this apart to take the batteries out of it, and I discovered something I just didn't remember. This uses a 15-volt battery for some of the resistance ranges. I was shocked. It says right there, 15 volts. And this battery, I don't have any idea how old this is. It's a Duracell. But you can see from the wear around the edges, this sucker's been abused. Let's see what voltage it has now. 1.4 volts. Wow. This battery, they don't have dates on these, unfortunately. I'm kind of shocked. The paint when they press these together, there's a ridge that's created right here. The coating is gone because this battery's been bouncing around in this meter for so long that it's polished off all of the finish. Wow. Well, I'm still going to take these batteries out, but I'm shocked. This is 14.5 volts still. I don't have any idea how old this is. Made in Japan. Yeah. I'll be darned. Well, I didn't know. I don't know where I'm going to put those, but yeah. And you can tell the Bakelite mounts are gone. Surprised that one's still there. So there's my noisemaker. I used contact cement to try to save that. I don't know if I've got better epoxy glues now that I could probably help secure that with, but I think I'm probably never going to do that because this is not going to be open again, so I'm just going to tape it back together, call it down. But I was just shocked. 15 volt battery. I don't even know if I could get one anymore. I haven't looked. So anyway, so once that got to the point where I just decided I couldn't use it anymore. Oh, by the way, this is a Myconta brand, and we had a Radio Shack store where I lived, and so a lot of stuff that I owned came from there because, well, that was pretty much the closest and easiest, and usually back then the cheapest place to get electrical stuff. I used to buy a lot of things from Radio Shack, and then when I got older and stopped doing much with electronics for a while, then I stopped going there, and then they went out of business. So this is the newer microntometer. It has a lot of additional features. This had a volt amps times 2 because this has limited range on the scale, and in order to get the higher voltages you'd have to bump it up on the times 2 to get the range you wanted. This too has been abused, and as you can see, it is also being held together with electrical tape because it also has been on the ground more than it should have been. The meter movement in this is better than in this one, but it's still tired. So then, this was added to my collection of meters. My Beckman, which if you've watched my videos, you've seen this being used a lot. I really don't know how old this is. Let's see, it was made in Taiwan, but Beckman Industrial Corp was apparently in San Diego, California. This one's had a hard life, not as hard as these two. It has been bounced. It shouldn't. It really shouldn't have been, but it did. So this was my primary meter from the day I got it, and I say that because now I think this meter is 30 years old. I think the reason it still lives, I think, is in part because I got out of electronics for a while and didn't do much. If I needed a meter, this was usually the one I grabbed, but I didn't use it very often because I wasn't doing a lot. And then once I got back into the electronics hobby, this was the meter I grabbed. Then Radio Shack was known back then for having sales, and I wanted a meter that I could carry with me and use elsewhere. This one pretty much stayed at home. This one wound up in my car, in my glove box, or whatever. This is an auto-ranging meter, and I didn't use this hardly at all though because this was still my primary. If I went out somewhere and I needed a meter for something, this is what I had. but it didn't get used very much. It spent most of its time sitting around. And then, when Radio Shack was going out of business, I wound up with this. This meter also hasn't been used that much because I've got that one. And I bought this one again because, well, they're going out of business, and so the price was about half, or almost half. It was a lot less than what they were originally asking for it, so I thought, why not? Sometimes I need more than one meter, and this has the ability to measure capacitors, an ability that seems to have gone away. I don't know what happened. Maybe I forgot to short out a capacitor that had voltage on it and it damaged this. But pretty much everything else works on this. It's actually got some capabilities. It's got a USB port in it and so on. But this doesn't get used that much either. I mean, I do use it. There were times when I was measuring a bunch of pulled resistors, I use this to measure the resistances because it's quicker than constantly changing the range. But now we get to the point that I wanted to make about why was I doing such stupid stuff when I was doing this. Since age 14, all of my meters have been manual. I was used to setting the range and then reading the value on the meter. I was not used to the meter choosing the range for me. Now that seems like a silly thing, and maybe it is. And part of the problem is I was kind of operating in auto mode, I guess, a lot. I would grab a resistor and I would glance at it, and I'd have a pretty good idea of what the value should be, I thought. I would connect this to the resistor, and sometimes that assumption would be wrong, but in my head, I had set this meter for the range that I wanted, and I read it as though it were in that range. Seems pretty stupid, I know. But when I realized that, I said, oh, number one, I got to pay a whole lot more attention. And number two, I got to get away from the mindset that I'm always setting the range myself, because obviously auto range meters don't. So that, I think, was my biggest problem. I wasn't paying attention. I was so used to using manual ranging meters. In my head, the range had been set, and based on the resistor I was measuring, in my crazy mind, I was thinking, oh, this should be the range that we're in. I didn't pay attention, and part of what this does is, and I wish they hadn't done this, the part that tells you what range you're on is tucked way down here, and if it's sitting like this, you're not going to see it. It's kind of a lousy design. I wish they'd put it up there where you would actually see it. So now when I go to use this, I am much more aware of my bad habit and my tendencies, and I am much more aware of the fact that I need to pay close attention to what it's telling me. Seems like an obvious thing. But until I realized what I was doing, it wasn't obvious. I was just doing stupid crap and getting myself into trouble. Now that I've really made myself aware, I don't think I'm going to make those kinds of mistakes again, because now I'm thinking more about what I'm doing and about the fact this is auto ranging, and I need to let it tell me what it's doing. But when you consider, let me see, 68 till now, let's see if my brains would be 32, 54 years of using these. So I got into the habit of using these, and I wasn't used to using these, and it got me into trouble. Now, but the other thing I wanted to talk about is there a place for these? In fact, you've probably seen that I have one of those. This was the last meter I bought. So why would I do that? Am I crazy? Well, there are things I use that BTVM for that I can't use anything else for. And actually, I can, I think, demonstrate with this meter. And I'm going to use this because that one takes a while to turn on. And I didn't turn it on, so we're not going to. I want to show you, and oh, the other thing is, well, yeah. One of my jobs was working on copiers, and I worked on copiers that were very early. They used relays and they used micro switches. Even some of the newer ones that got rid of a lot of the relays, they still used these. And some of them get used hard, and they get used a lot. And I'm going to show you what I use this for, or how I use this. All right, so hopefully this cooperates, and this micro switch, which is not all that healthy, does what I want it to do. So when you push down on one of these, at a certain point, what should happen with a good micro switch is when you hit it, it should automatically, or it should immediately go to closed or go to open. But let me show you if I can. Now I'm just going to move my finger off from this a little bit. And you see that needle moving. And this is a sign, that's a sign of a bad micro switch. Watch what happens when I'm going to use my Beckman because it's faster than, it is faster than the auto-ranging meters that I've got. All right. So let me show you what it does. It kind of gives you, when I was testing this meter earlier, it wasn't working as well as this. What it was doing was going from this to this and back again. It wasn't. Maybe the switches decided to get worse. Let's try my auto ranging meter. Let's see what that does. Because if that's all you've got, all right. Let's see if we can. Let's see if we can. I knew that's what was going to happen. Come back here. All right. Don't do that. No. I don't want you. Oh, stop it. Behave. Hit buttons I didn't want to hit. All right. Are we going to stay? All right. I think. Okay, here we go. Are you going to make a liar out of me? You can see this is not going to be very helpful. It doesn't tell me what I want to know. So I keep analog meters around for measuring micro switches. I do use them on, kill my batteries. I do use them on volume controls, although on my Philco radio that I just did, I discovered that maybe that's not the best way to do it. At least not with that volume control, because that one went from working after I cleaned it to not working. So that was frustrating. But I have slide switches in my realistic stereo that I troubleshooted and cleaned using this, and I can do the same thing with the VTVM. So switches and volume controls, I I still I still find a use for these analog meters, and maybe it's just my history of working on things. Number one, using an analog meter, because that's what we used when we were working on these copiers. And so I got used to that being my troubleshooting tool of choice. And so I guess I've never gotten beyond that because that's what I was used to. And as you can see, if all you've got is an auto-ranging meter, and you want to know, say, I think this came out of, I believe, a pinball machine. It was in a box of junk from a guy who used to repair them. And I would consider this switch to not be good. I wouldn't use it in anything. Because when it's moving like that, my history with these is when these switches start behaving like this one is, they will misbehave. And particularly in a copier where timing is important, you don't want your switch delaying before it actually does things or doing things in advance like this one was doing. So a switch that behaved like this was not usable in our copiers. They had to get replaced. So this was a very valuable tool for us to determine, do we have a bad switch or is there something else going on? So that was a lot of how I got used to using analog meters for testing switches and such, because I found it to be very useful. And the modern meters, although my Beckman is actually a lot faster than I thought it was. It really it kind of surprised me, because when I played with this earlier, it wasn't giving me that response. This one was doing a far better job of reviewing problems than that was. But well, I guess that lets me know that my primary meter, my Beckman, is still possibly useful for things like this. But if I want to quickly check a volume control or tone control or something, I will use something like this, because this does, wherever, grab the right cables, you can tell if it's dancing, if your connection is intermittent. You can tell it on the meter. I mean, it is damp, but it will tell you small motions. It'll show you the small motions, and I found it very useful over the years. Do you need to get one of these? Depends on what you're doing. If you have something like this that works well enough that you could probably use that, that also is fine. But I just wanted to kind of explain why I got into, well, I shared my mistakes, but I felt pretty stupid doing it. But I also really wanted to know, well, why was I screwing up so badly? Why was I missing this? Why was I doing that? Because, as you see, I've been working with meters for a very long time. This one especially, I think 30 years worth. So I should have been doing a better job at reading my resistances, and it kind of upset me that I was making those mistakes. But now that I've thought about it, and now that I see my tendencies, number one, frequently when I'm working on stuff like on the radio, the old radios and such, I wind up preoccupied and focused on the problem I'm trying to resolve. And I think when I go to use a meter, I'm still keeping my focus on, I'm still pondering in my mind what the problem might be, and I'm using my meter with only half a mind. Now that I'm aware of this, I mean, because when I was showing you this and the mistakes I was making, one measurement was 98.7. Another one was 987. That should have been obvious. I shouldn't have made a mistake. I shouldn't have been making. Should not have made the mistakes I was making. The problem is I wasn't paying attention, and I was so used to knowing what range I was using. And that's the other thing. I'm used to just glancing at my meter, saying, "Oh, well, that's set here. That means that number that I'm reading here, relative to this, means this." And I was so used to doing that, you know, it was second nature for me. Oh yeah, I'm on 20K. It says, whatever it says, okay, that means that's K ohms. And I was just so used to that, to knowing the range, picking the range, and being able to tell at a glance what range I was using, that I just, obviously an auto-ranging meter doesn't tell you, well, actually, wrong. It does tell you what range it has selected, and you gotta pay attention to it. So, anyway. Plus I thought, people might be interested in the different meters, how they used to be. And I bought this. This was a little triplet meter. And as you may notice, it's all apart. Notice the rust. I spotted water damage at this. I got this at a tag sale, and I spotted the water damage, and the guy wanted more money for it, and I said, this has been damaged by water. I can see it. So I gave it to him. I think I paid $3 for it. I bought it anyway because I thought it pretty neat. I might put it back just to have it as a shelf queen, a vintage triplet meter. Pretty neat little meter. Too bad it's tiny, obviously, but this is a piece of history from the history of meters. Triplet has a good name in meters, and they're respected by a lot of people. Unfortunately, the rotary switch in there, parts of it got corroded away, so that switch is toast. And the meter movement is iffy, and so that meter will probably never ever work again, unfortunately. But one of these days, when I have the inclination, I might play with it some more to see what I can do with it. But I thought, so I'm kind of interested in obviously vintage stuff. I'm interested in it, and so this is very similar. There is a Simpson meter. It's also another well-known meter name. It's bigger, higher quality than this. Micron was not a high-quality brand necessarily, but these meters served me extremely well. I mean, this was not expensive, but they've served me extremely well. They both still work, kind of. And now, if I really wanted to get into, I wouldn't bother with this. The little pin style cables, they just don't work. Because you can go in there and press that split section of that connector back together, and the first time you plug that in there, it'll open them up again, and over a very short period of time, it will cease staying in. But this one, I don't know. I'm reluctant to play with it because it works, and I can use it as it is, and it doesn't have to be accurate. I've got other meters that will give me accuracy. All it has to do is tell me relative activity on something that has resistance, and that's all I really use it for. So anyway, so this one, I'm pretty sure this dates from probably early 60s, I think. I'm not sure, I don't know. Of course, there's nothing on it, I don't think there's anything in it. I don't know if there's any way. Oh, there's a Micronta 22-049. I might look up that number and see if I can find out how old this is. This one actually has a number on it too, which I didn't notice before. It's a 22-204B. And this, and this Beckman, for anyone who cares, is a DM15XL. This little thing has been a workhorse. I bought it because Beckman has a good name, or did back when I bought that. They probably still do. I don't know. But it's somewhere around 30 years old. But I'll have to look up that model number and see. So I don't think does this one even have a model number? Yeah, a category. This one is a 22813. I think I'm going to look up some of these model numbers, see if I can find out anything about them. Because they're Radio Shack, there might be information on them, but if there is, I might put it in my pinned comment or on my description of this video. So anyway, I'm going to bail out now, but this is my history with meters, and I think it explains why I was just making such dumb mistakes. Something I do not want to repeat. And once again, it's reminding me that you can't go on autopilot if you want to do things right. And that's what I was doing. I was just falling back into my habits of how I used to do things and simply not paying attention to what I needed to be paying attention to. So it makes me wonder where else in my life I'm doing that, where I'm just going by rote. That will require some additional thought. At least I'm hoping I pay attention in the future in situations where I can perhaps avoid making mistakes because I'm not paying attention. All right, well, I'm going to bail out, as I said a moment ago, and interested to see if there are any comments on this. Some of you probably think I'm pretty loopy, but guilty of making some silly mistakes. And not entirely thrilled with the mistakes I've made, but I'm trying to learn from them. And so that's, I guess, the big thing, the important thing is learn from your mistakes. And with that, I'm going to say thanks for watching, and hopefully see you next time.